Thrilled that for our second speaker of the afternoon, we have Dr. Rama Gheerawo. We exist for one reason and one reason only, and that's to use design to improve people's lives. These are the words of our next speaker today, the director of the Helen Hamlin Centre for Design, Dr. Rama Gheerawo. It seems like a simple statement, and it is all the more compelling and inclusive for being so. This focus of the work of Rama Gheerawo and the Helen Hamlin Centre for Design is everywhere evident in the over 300 projects that the Centre has been involved in to date, using design to address inequalities and exclusions by, for example, age, ability, gender, race, culture, geography, and economics. When we think of research centres, there's sometimes a tendency, at least in myself, to react against more centering and to think instead of research dissipations or research dispersals. But when I started looking at the work of the Helen Hamlin Centre for Design, that's exactly what I found. The work of the centre is so expansive and diverse. It's so outward and inclusive that summarizing for the purpose of an introduction is challenging. The Centre has been actively engaging in projects that reach across so many varied aspects of the most pressing and urgent challenges societies across the globe experience. So, for example, a recent strand of their activity has been inclusive design for social impact, in which the Centre has partnered with a great many individuals and communities to use design in practical ways to directly address social problems. So, for example, they worked in the city of Derry, Londonderry, embedding a team in the city for 3 years to work with community and political structures to launch Our Future Foil project as a vehicle to support urban transformation and address mental health. They worked with children in South London, looking at eating habits and obesity against a background of environmental and situational factors. And they've also used their healthcare expertise to work with triage teams in Edinburgh, partnering with the Council and NHS Lothian. In another strand of their activity, the Helen Hamlin Centre for Design is focused on age and diversity, thinking through age in all its representations, whether that is digital age, social age, educational age, the age spectrum, or life course transitions. And tellingly, they've also focused on age across both younger and later years, and indeed intergenerational connections. The Centre has also been involved in projects looking at how to provide care and support to address societal issues such as suicide, paranoia, and anxiety. As well as this, the Centre has also been involved in rapid response design projects in relation to the COVID-19 pandemic. The poet June Jordan said, "My heart is not peripheral to me." And this is emblematic of Rama Gheerawo's energizing force as director of the Centre, which carries with it the empathy and empowerment that are the defining characteristics of his approach to creative leadership and design. He won a Hall of Fame award for his work at the Design Week Awards in 2019 and was named the 2018 Creative Leader by Creative Review alongside Paul Smith and Björk. He also sits on a number of advisory boards and committees for awards, universities, and organizations such as the UK Design Council, the International Association for Universal Design, UX India, the Design Management Institute, and the Design Intelligence Awards. He's worked as a visiting professor at the Royal Danish Academy of Fine Arts and the Katowice Academy of Fine Art. Okay, keep your hearts anything but peripheral to you as we welcome Dr. Rama Gheerawo.
Wow, I can tell that you're a poet and a writer because I too need that introduction email to me. I hardly recognized myself. And I loved what you said about stepping beyond the centering process to the kind of dissipation and the divergent process. I often think of empathy like not being a closed fist or a closed mouth or a closed mind, but an open hand. And that is what I hope we will share today. So in the time-honored fashion of sharing screen, I hope everyone can see this. Fantastic. So the talk is titled Design.Different because I always felt that we were a bit of an outsider. We were designing differently to make a difference. And, you know, it just came to mind that we design different. So I will be sharing some of our thoughts, our ideas, some of our research. Fantastic to have the intellectual fodder and the emotional fodder from the previous speaker. And Isabel, you're a difficult act to follow. So who am I? Well, I'm a designer and a design activist. I actually go out there and do design. The word director for me doesn't mean that you sit behind a desk and sort of conduct things. It means you're actually out there holding a video camera, not a gun. This isn't a gun. And understanding what is going on in people's lives, what is going on around you. So this for me is design. This is also design. Some of the projects that were mentioned by Colin, bottom center, you see the wayfinding for Terminal 5 that we did. If you like it, we did it. If you don't like it, they executed it badly. That's my little disclaimer. Our focus is across 4 different areas, each led by an amazing individual. Age and diversity led by Chris McGinley. Healthcare was led by Johnny West. Business impact led by Ninela Ivanova. And social impact, we're doing more project by project spaces. So they're led by a variety of individuals. Some of the shots of work that we've done, you'll see on screen. But bottom left is one I really love because it was taken in 2019 in Detroit at a conference we run called Include. And for me, it represents voices that weren't often seen in design: young, Black, female. We also have kicked off yet another institute this time, Colin. We didn't call it a center, but this was bringing together the words design and age in the same title, 2 words that are often an oxymoron. Some great partners here: Oxford University, Newcastle University, the International Longevity Centre and the Design Museum. And just watch the space as this grows and breathes life into the design economy. The reason for it is very simple. This slide shows that for many thousands of years, we've not really been living beyond 30. And then, in the early 1800s, that shot up to, I think in Europe, if you want to live long, become a woman and move to France, because French women apparently live the longest. But there is a problem with design, and I can prove it to you. So if you take out your smartphone and you type in the word designer in any SMS application, this is what comes up as the predictive icon. Someone who's wearing a beret and wielding a paintbrush. And is this what designers do? Well, design is much more multifaceted. It goes across the spectrum of life. It's strategic, it's empathic, it's artistic, it's spiritual, it's all of these things. Design is centered around people, by people, because of people, for people. You can tell I'm a bit passionate about design. My talk should come with a health warning about how passionate I am for design. But we say that, design is really centered around people, or rearranging the words, people-centered design. The other term is inclusive design, which was defined as including the needs of the widest number of people. And there's just something beautiful about that, because you will exclude people, but you should almost also look at who you include and how you include. It's a 27-year history, and we managed to find the front cover of the conference where this was first published. So it was the Applied Ergonomics Conference that took place in Toronto in 1994. On the right, you see a website, designingwithpeople.org, which has many tools and techniques we developed with the University of Cambridge, amongst others, that are just open source. We don't want to be a closed door, so this is just there for anyone to use. You can even download a consent form if you want to. But inclusive design, putting aside all universities and centers and consent forms to one side and stepping into humanity, for me, inclusive design is design at its most powerful and conscious. It's at its most empathic and emphatic. It has global context, universal impact. And something that really hit home really hard for me last year, following the death of George Floyd, was the conversations around race. So, you know, on the left, you see 4 hashtags that have really, you know, risen in terms of their use. And in July last year, I held a talk that was called Exclusion, Why Design Should Be Doing More. It featured these 4 people that you see on right, including myself. There was many things that came out of that, but one thing utterly surprised me. And that was all of us who are of Black, Bayesian, American, Indigenous, and Indian heritage, all of us were appointed to our positions as deans, presidents, or directors in design organizations in the last 5 years. And I honestly thought there would be someone else before me. We all had to embrace the role of the reluctant pathfinder and make sure that we don't end up as a kind of token person of color. So this was really looking at how inclusive design can address these different issues. And one way that we do that is at the center is to call them innovation axes, because age, you look across life stage rather than numerical age. Numerical age only relates to your passport. Ability, range of physical, cognitive, sensory abilities. Gender, more than 2 genders and identifiers, and race, including people of diverse backgrounds and cultures. And one way of talking to people, especially in boardrooms and in communities, is that it makes a better community, it makes a better business, and there are actually metrics that show this. So I am an engineer in a previous life, so I don't shy away from metrics such as we see at the bottom. The pandemic has brought issues of exclusion into all of our lives. We all thought aging happened to someone else. I love this image because here is a 25-year-old designer talking to a 75-year-old woman about sexuality. And there was a project that we did with AgeUK. Interesting, again, going back to numbers, STI, sexually transmitted infections, rising in the over 60s, dropping in the under 30s. And why is that? You know, some of the people we spoke to had been married for nearly 40 years, back on the dating scene for various reasons, had never touched a condom. So how do you speak to that? How do you encourage a conversation and a respectful dialogue between people that are 40 or 50 years apart? We all thought disability was someone else's issue. You know, why do people of differing abilities get the rough end of design? You know, are these items are very functional, but would anyone want to use them or wake up next to that every morning? So we all believed a wonderful nonsense, looking good like the peacock on the left, whereas doing good is at the center of inclusive design. So we'll talk a little bit about what that means. And sometimes that means being like this chicken who strapped some rockets to her back and is taking first aid somewhere. It looks a bit messy. Sticking with the pandemic, this is UCL hospitals. When the when the UK sort of closed down last year, every single designer we knew wanted to do something, and many of them wanted to create the new mask, the new ventilator. We took a breath for 24 hours, and then we went to the hospitals and actually asked them, what do you need? They didn't need new masks because there were 4 that were approved for this particular hospital. What they needed was a map, because 40 to 70% of the staff on the ward were new, either students or retired medics and clinicians being drawn in. So overnight, we looked at where things went, looked at an architectural plan of the building and created this. The existing staff were tired of telling new staff where things were, and they needed to reorientate them. And this simple change made this difference. This is Laura. She was on the front line, still is on the front line, and her thumbs up says it all. So for me, this is inclusive design. So now we need inclusive design for people across a range of diversity. We have processes, which I won't go into great detail, but I'll give you some resources where you can go into that. But if you take a simple 4-stage innovation activity, process, where you explore something, you then do the focus phase, you then develop ideas and you deliver it, you can add inclusive design activities throughout to engage people, to give them a platform, to give them a voice, but even to make their voice more prominent and powerful than yours. Why shouldn't people be authors of their own solutions? So going into some of the research detail of what we do, on the ground engagement in homes, online and public spaces. So on the left, you see Dr. Katie Gaudian, who did a PhD in design and autism, working in homes with autistic adults. In the center, Dr. Will Rennell, who looked at an excluded area of sonic inclusion. We were being, there's a lot of focus on physical inclusivity. What about sonic inclusion? On the right, Dr. Chris McGinley, who leads our age and diversity space, talking to our youngest ever participant on a community-based project for Samsung. And in case you're wondering, Chris is not the little boy in blue. Chris is the researcher talking to him. Go beyond the obvious, address visible and non-visible qualities. Great statistics from the government, like 21% of people have a disability. I actually believe the figure is closer to 99.9%. Here's proof. If we were looking at neurodiversity, stress, for example, can be classified as a level of cognitive impairment by some papers and researchers. So if you've been stressed in the last 24 hours, there you are. Disability is not just a fixed definition. It's actually a very, very wide camp. A disabled friend of mine said to me, many people are just temporarily able-bodied. So I don't know if you've heard of the word TABS, but it means temporarily able-bodied. Engage with diverse people, but there is a problem here because we typically focus on the individual. Here you see one of our researchers, Carmel, on that project that you mentioned, Colin, that was looking at obesity amongst children in South London. These 5 qualifiers you see on the left, they differ between individuals, big groups, and small groups. Something like time, continuity, ownership, legacy, and trust take on a different flavor within the communal context. Time, if you are engaging with an individual, you can do that in a short time. It can take months or years to get a community to trust you. And that's why we moved our team out to live in the city of Derry. So that trust was there. They're not people parachuting in from another city. They're actually part of the community and immersed in it. And these are some of the shots from that engagement, which went from the the community to the civil authorities. We did our biggest ever research engagement where 40,000 people engaged with an installation that we put in place for Halloween to just talk about their aspirations. Active participation also means, the dreaded word of co-creation that's immensely overused. But I just wanted to flash up this picture. It's in East London, one of the very first projects we did looking at communities of different cultures. And this was in Arnold Circus in East London, which sees a Bangladeshi community, indigenous kind of English community. It sees the nouveau riche, drug dealers, and all sorts of desirables and undesirables, so to speak. And we were asking the question, who owns the light in the city? And engaging with the Bangladeshi community was very difficult until we realized a very simple thing, that children actually lead the way. So for many communities, the children actually speak the best level of English, and they were the ones who were most curious about our balloon engagement, and they would bring the parents and grandparents along. So my top tip for the day is balloons make a great research tool. We're talking of research tools. I'm going to share a couple with you. On screen, you see a book that was done by the Norwegians, the Design and Architecture Norway, and the website is there, innovatingwithpeople.net. We supported them. At the Helen Hamlin Center, we have an archive of over 120 publications on all sorts of topics. And the bit.ly address is HH Archive, very simple to put. So I don't know if Katie, if you can stick that in the chat, that would be amazing. We classify tools in 100 different ways. You know, we've done 300 projects and 300 methods, a bespoke. But here are sort of 8 methods that we use. And I'll go through them in a little bit more detail in a minute, but I just want to draw your attention to 2 at the bottom. One is provoking response. You know, in the early days, we employed and talked to a lot of social anthropologists who, I remember a conversation 20 years ago where they said, well, you know, you're not observing people necessarily from a distance. So how, you know, how can you know that you are not, you know, you're not biasing and skewing things? And it was a great question. And it really made me think that actually as designers, you know, quite a lot of the time, it's not observation from a distance, it's also immersion. And we have a social anthropologist on staff who actually has helped develop some of these immersive techniques. And just 4 more, the good things of prototyping, again, co-creating. So don't design anything and inflict it on people, include them. Immersion, the amount of people who design stuff that they don't use themselves, it absolutely annoys me. And then the final one is listening. So I'm going to wrap up in the final sort of, you know, 8 or 9 minutes with just some case studies. And, you know, I hate the word case studies, but just some experiences. This was a sort of year-long project with Arthritis Research UK, as they were called then. Simple question, can you peel a carrot one-handed? Yes, this product designer went out and spent a lot of time with older people in kitchens. If you fix this implement to a cutting board, you can actually peel a carrot one-handed. And who wouldn't want this? And that's the principle of inclusive design. You design for people who might be excluded, but actually you design something that's inclusive of everyone. Can color change a person's life? Yes, if you're in a care home. One particular care home we went to said older people had given up on life. The designer there trained as a carer and actually immersed himself in the life of the care home. He realized that older people actually just couldn't see the food. I don't know why most care home food was white, but white food on a white plate on a white tablecloth in a badly lit room, they couldn't see. Changed the color of the plate to blue, people started to see the food and some even started to put back on weight. This was one of the most inspirational photographs in my career. It's nearly 30 years old, and it was a Japanese CEO who was asked to build a whole new train line, 16 stations, trains and everything. He went out and did the research. You know, this guy, his name is Sadamura-san, he's a good friend. He went out and did the research because he said, I don't want people to tell me what are the difficulties others are having. I want to know it myself. And back in the day, 25 years ago, this was so beyond the normative, because as a CEO, you expect people to report to you. But this was hugely inspirational to me. You're never too busy. You're never too important to actually go out and immerse yourself and include and do the work. And this is what he designed. one of the most beautiful and comfortable lines in the world. We were redesigning the emergency ambulance, and these were just some of the people involved. This is a third of the people. So everything we do is extremely communal, and we actually co-opted some paramedics onto the design team because, you know, we don't want to be designing in isolation. We were designing in hospitals with the London Ambulance Service, with 12 ambulance trusts. And inclusive design can be playful. This was looking at driverless cars, and this girl said, I'd love for my pet to pick me up from school. And we also thought about the greening of the city. How might a vehicle kind of almost conversely help with the greening of the city? And what if it's solar powered and it can actually bring a little bubble of respite to you wherever you are? It's a playful idea, but it's one that actually became the darling of the project. So very finally, last 5 minutes or so, I'm just going to talk about working on global issues in local contexts, because that inclusive design for social impact is such a heartbeat. In the Middle East, we went out, you can see myself and 2 white presenting colleagues working with migrant workers. And if you look, the only people smiling are me and my colleagues. The migrant workers did not trust us. They did not know who we are. And we actually had to start a game of cricket in the car park. And then they joined in and they said, well, you can't be any sort of government spy because you play cricket. And there was a sort of lesson in quick empathy there. And then this happened. This migrant worker on the left, this gentleman, walked in and he was nervous. He was shaking. And in the center, you see a design professor. On the right, you see a medic student. And I love the fact she's kneeling on the ground to kind of give him a positionality. And you can see that he's leaning forward and he's actually talking to them. One of the things they said is they were very scared of talking to women because they never met any in the country that they were in. So they didn't know if these professors and students were there to trick them. And it was just something that you could never plan for. This is a rare photograph where you see nationals sitting with migrant workers, and they're sitting on the floor because that's where the migrant workers would sit, not on the tables at the back. We also challenged everyone on the project to live on $5 to $7 US a day, and we did it. It's incredibly difficult. You eat a lot of bread, let me put it that way. And the things that came out, 14 different ideas, and 3 of them were taken up by the government and a group called Reach Out Towards Asia. In Japan, we went after the May 2011 disaster, we went back into the zone, the Fukushima zone, in 3 years later, 3.5 years later, with a group of Japanese citizens to look at how can this ghost town be repopulated? Because it really was like a movie. You know, shoes and knives and forks and bicycles just left where they were 3.5 years before. People were in temporary housing. This is housing. Is it a home? What does it mean when there's radioactive waste waiting to be collected outside your local supermarket? What does it mean when you have a radioactive shrine next to a traditional one? And all of these people, we got them together to use the tools of design. They created a set of ideas that were then presented to Tokyo's mayor, and was incredibly proud of how they rethought strategies of how they would want to rebuild their community. So we weren't telling them anything. We gave them some tools and post-it notes. They did it. So finally, Hong Kong. And this embodies a really important phrase of designing for your future selves. This was looking at aging in a vertical city because Hong Kong is very vertical. This is one of our participants, Christina. She was 21 at the time, and here she is having a sort of dialogue with her 81-year-old self. So that sense of self as a designer can be a morphing, changing thing. This is a Hong Kong community, very vertical. very vertical. And our process, just picking up on some of these research methods, it was about seeing what people do, following this woman from the 57th floor to the local 7-Eleven, asking people, going into their homes. So why is that red Buddha of such importance in this really tiny flat for this gentleman? Provoking responses. So here's a bed prototype, and we're asking this gentleman in a care home on his bed space about this prototype and what works and what doesn't. Futuring. So putting people's existing challenges into a future scenario, and then kind of red penning what works and what doesn't work. Prototyping, well, we all know what that is, but it's part of the empathic inquiry. It's not just about seeing if things works. Co-creating, giving people the tools to become authors of their own situations. So here is a group of elders looking at what should the institution look like, and immersing. So students and researchers had to eat in the care home, use the hoists, lie on the beds, etc. And they discovered many things, I remember a group of 80-year-olds actually saying, why do you guys look so miserable? Why do you look so miserable towards us? Like we are in the situation we're in. And it turns out in a care home, you have to be extremely resilient and strong. And finally, listening. So what did we do? Well, we went out and we spoke to people in their homes. Research is a beautiful thing. This is Mr. Wong, and this is the house that he lives in. This is another gentleman. And look at everything that's around him. And this is the house that he lives in. And this lady, she's 74. She climbs up to the top bunk every day. And this is where she lives. So research is not just resilient, it's beautiful. And this is a set of photographs that we created. So I'll just very quickly show you what we did. You go from that kind of home into this space, 8 people to a room. At home, you can sit with your shirt off, surrounded by your things. In the institution, you have to negotiate that space with other people. At home, you're surrounded by tokens of love. In the institution, your bathroom looks like this. So we created some prototypes for tools for conversations. And in the interest of time, I'll just show you one of them, which is a bed space. We did a number of different ones, drawing from different types of design. But at the end of the day, all that we were doing was designing experiences. It didn't matter if you were an architect or a product designer. One of the things we heard of was people in care homes, the #1 complaint is they wanted to move bed. They didn't like the person next to them. And I hadn't really read that in any of the literature. The reason you can't move is because your curtain rails are fixed into the ceiling. So what happens if you put the curtain rails onto the bed? And it actually starts to look a little bit like a cabin on an aircraft. So what happens if this becomes your care home capsule rather than a care home bed in an open plan space? And this is what we created. It has the same footprint as the bed that is on the back. So on the back of the picture, you can see the footprint of an existing bed. Lots of different innovations here, including a fold-away chair you see at the front of the picture that can hang in the wardrobe. So it means that when a relative comes to visit you, you don't have to wait 20 minutes for busy staff to bring you a chair. You have your own chair. The color palette was evolved from the color of bodily fluids on the left to something that was a bit more generative and regenerative, such as the headboard area being blue, because that engenders better rest. Places for you to hold those tokens of love. And anything that you touch is red, because red is one of those colors that remains within your visual acuity as you age. And really importantly, you shouldn't design anything that you don't want to use yourself. So this is Sam and Gabrielle actually using the bed just before the show opened, and these were the were part of the team that were there just at the opening of the exhibition. So I'm going to leave you with a couple of top tips, and then I'll finish. Let your creative self shine and bring balance into whatever you do, and that does mean a set of internalization. We do yoga and self-reflection in any workshops that we do as creatives and as designers. In fact, tomorrow I'll be doing this with a group of people from around the world. And this is a group of Chinese CEOs. Go beyond Post-it notes. Don't, design isn't death by Post-it notes. Talk about people, not users or consumers. Users use, consumers consume, but people live. No one in the history of humanity has ever said, hi, my name is Rama. I'm a user of beer and Bollywood. So let's evolve our language. Research and design for aspiration, not for desperation. And finally, think about context and culture. Why? Well, we went to, when we were in the Middle East, there's some very we do a lot of work around public toilets, and there's so much genderism around public toilet signs. So for many people that were flown in, this looked like the female toilet because of the classically gendered, exclusive, uninclusive sign that we have here. But that is Qatari national dress. So this was actually the male toilet. So again, race and culture and context starts to mean different things. And very finally, above all, you can design the most inclusively designed empathic creation. But please, please, please make sure that your spelling is correct. And it took 3 months and my mother to tell me that that should say bamboo shoot. It was taken from a real menu in Hong Kong. So thank you very much.